AI ethics panel. So for me, as a founder using AI to solve problems for my business, I think AI is exciting. I'd like to hear from everyone what they think of AI. So fill in the missing word from the sentence on 3, 2, 1. AI is exciting as well? Dangerous? I heard sus somewhere. Who said sus? AI is sus. All right, well, we'll dig into that a little bit more in the AI ethics panel. I'd like to welcome first to the stage Yusra Ibrahim, who's a machine learning site reliability engineer at Google. Please make some noise. Up next on our panel is Nayur, a partner at Quantum Black, the AI division of McKinsey. Welcome. Next up, we have Ahmed Wobi, the founder of Tonus Tech. And so our final panelist, Sadia, is unable to make it today. We can either leave the seat empty, but I think that'd be a waste of a seat on the stage. So is there anyone that'd like to volunteer and come down to the stage and speak about AI? We have a volunteer. Let's welcome. And your name is?
I'm Aleena.
Aleena, welcome. Please take a seat. And finally, our Queen Ruler Supreme of the Islamic Makers Machine Learning Slack channel. If there's anyone that can teach you about maths, AI, large language models, transformers, I'll stop there because his head might get too big and he won't fit through. Please welcome to the stage our moderator for the panel, Junaid.
Assalamu alaikum. So I heard this morning that there were 3 salams, so I want to do the same thing, but I want to go left, center, right. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Oh, it's a tie between you two. So, welcome. Welcome to the AI Tech Ethics panel. We have about 50 minutes today, so we'll try not to go over. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions at the end of this, but find us afterwards, and we will answer your questions or run away. Depends on how difficult they are. A universal disclaimer before we get started is we're all speaking for ourselves, not for the companies or the employers that we work for. So these opinions are our own employers. They're not a reflection for who we're working for. So please keep that front of mind. It covers our backs, but it also sort of helps you not get the wrong idea. Okay? So for today, I have 3 themes that I want to talk about with respect to AI and ethics. And the questions that come off of these 3 themes will bleed into each other. But the idea is that we start from very general principles and then get more and more specific. And and then this is like an open forum, so feel free to cut in. And it's not fully like Piers Morgan, but it would be good if we could make it a little bit like that. I'm not going to put any of you on the spot, but at the same time, there will be some pushback as well. So the first question I have for you guys is really around why are we here? Why should all of these people listen to a discussion about ethics and AI? So what are ethical considerations that are important when designing and using AI systems? And what problems arise from a minority community like us where we just ignore that? So I'll throw that out there for you guys. Yeah?
I should probably do an intro first.
Yes, and introduce yourselves as well.
So the reason I'm here is that I do a master's in AI ethics, and so this is very fresh for me. It's actually the first program that they're running, and I do this at Cambridge University, so it's my academic expertise, hence I've volunteered. But a lot of what I study at university is around the bias and the kind of issues with AI. So, we look at it and we think it's very exciting and this is really cool and this is the new thing and we should use it. But we don't really think about, what are the dangers of tech and what are the dangers of AI. And so the talk that we saw a bit earlier kind of hinted on this, right? Which is that like most of the data that we have around us as Muslims, as a minority community, is really quite negative. And when you look at the models and things and stuff that will be trained on this data, it is quite dangerous when you think of the things that it'll be doing for us, right? It's like, what do we see on social media? But also things like, you know, who gets healthcare and who gets like bail when you're kind of getting out of jail, and like things that are really consequential of people's lives and things that actually won't be in our benefit as Muslims. And it's not to say that we shouldn't engage with them, but more that we should engage with actually trying to fix these problems and being like really, really aware of them. So right now we're represented quite badly, really in like pretty much all data sets really. But we kind of want to be able to change that. And the only way we can change that is by really identifying it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, so I totally agree, and I think I'll speak a little bit about my context and background. So at Tonus Tech, what we do is we have sensors and artificial intelligence to track the positions of people's muscles, joints, and limbs, and then the artificial intelligence coach acts as like explainable AI to improve movement. One of the ways that kind of we look at the kind of ethics around AI is patient data and retaining that and making sure that we kind of adhere to the principles of data dignity. So ensuring that you have consent and you're using data anonymously, that the users, they have complete control of that data and they can be deleted at any point. But also we have to consider the sort of the sampling of the library. So we don't want a library that is only, you know, white men over a specific age that have a specific body type from a specific socioeconomic background, because that wouldn't work with our software, and you'd end up getting models that were very biased and leaning in one direction. So for us, we have to make sure that the sampling for our artificial intelligence models is always broad and representative of our users.
Okay, I can go next. So I'm Nayur. I'm a partner based out of London. Work for a company called Quantum Black, which is part of McKinsey. One of the roles that I do, and one of the things I help organizations with, is really scaling artificial intelligence. And that's moving away from just one or two proof of concepts to hundreds or thousands of models running in production. Now, to do that, there is a journey that many companies need to go through. One of the other things I do is I talk a lot about diversity and inclusion. And I just want to build upon the data comments that you made earlier and the lack of representation. One of the problems, and I'm going to make a statement, and I'm happy to be challenged on it. Machines are not biased. Humans are. And it's the humans in the entire process, the humans who capture the data that we use, and the choices that we make or the humans make for what data sources should be used, the algorithms that are built, the people that test it, the people that validate it, and then building something that doesn't work for everyone. It only works for a minority group. And when I use minority, I mean it's more for the elite. So understanding the entire process and really trying to get more representation into the process so there is more of a voice, I think is a incredibly important thing before we start getting on to tackling bias, fairness, and a bunch of other things. And one of the things I just want to bring is also us and ground us on this. Ethics is such a broad topic, but one of the great things here for this group, and I, alhamdulillah, love seeing this, is that as Muslims, we have ethics codes. It's in the Quran and the Sunnah. We actually have decisions on how we should treat people fairly, how we should do business, how we should treat the world, how we should treat our parents. A lot of those principles might not be shared with the rest of the world. And this is why it makes it even more important that a lot of individuals here should be involved in this entire process. I'm sure we're going to delve a little bit deeper, but I just wanted to point that out.
Hey, so about myself, I'm in machine learning because of my studies. So I did a PhD in information extraction, natural language processing, and then I moved to machine learning engineering, and then now I'm working in machine learning infrastructure. So I had a bit of a mix between research and engineering, and now I'm more into engineering because I like building stuff more. So I'm going to just add to this in order not to repeat. So I definitely agree with fairness consideration, privacy, and other problems in terms of biases, reinforcing biases. But I guess also it's important for us to get involved in AI and machine learning to understand, like, not to fully trust what we see coming from a machine learning model. Because I feel like people think of machine learning now as a magic. Oh, wow, like it can do this. But actually, it's a human output, like whatever machine learning algorithm is giving us, based on other people that did this work, published it to the internet, and then it learned from this like basically human creation. So, and some of it is good, some of it is not good. And on top of this, machine learning also sometimes can be a little bit creative and make up stuff that is not really true. So, so I guess it's important for us also to understand the technology in order when we use it, we know how to use it. Of course, to tackle biases and fairness and all of this stuff, but also like to understand how can we trust it and how can we use it. So I think like this is also why I think it's important for us to get into AI and machine learning generally.
Okay, so I suppose one question that a contrarian might have, not me, is what is the difference between an AI system that's produced by Muslims versus an AI system that's not produced by Muslims? Isn't the output isn't it just an algorithmic output? What does that functionally look like? You have an app that's produced by Muslims that use artificial intelligence. What does that mean? What does that look like?
Okay, so I don't agree to have a machine learning model only produced by Muslims, because we are only like a subgroup of the community. So if you want to have like a good machine learning model, you should involve all the other parts of the community. So that's why actually what we are now against, right? So we don't want to have like a single like sort of kind of people only controlling this field and building models that only agree with their sort of ideas and whatever they think about the world should look like, and then we get excluded out of it. So I don't agree that we should like, or we need to have like a Muslim sort of ML model.
Okay.
So maybe someone else can
does
build
anybody else
this.
have?
Yeah, no, look, and I'll build off what Yusra said, and I'll kind of reiterate. Look, we have a lack of representation, a lack of diversity, just full stop in tech. And then AI is a smaller part of that, and then you have machine learning and deep learning, and you've got a bunch of other things. The question I would ask, and it's more like, it'll get people to start internalizing this a lot, and then we'll dive a little bit into foundational models in a second, is what happens when there is a group out there that is probably non-Muslim that creates fatwa.gpt. And there is where you're going to have to start thinking about the real problems that some of this technology could actually cause. There is where you're going to start to really question of, well, what data sets we use to train this stuff? And is that something that we would consider the Quran and the Sunnah of what we consider authentic? And also we have divisions in our own community, so there's other problems there. But then there's what humans were involved, and I'm more talking about scholars were involved inside the process to fine-tune this stuff, to make sure that it's relevant, to make sure that the answers are coming out. And I'm sure when we delve into large language models and what Yusra alluded to earlier around the term hallucinations or inaccuracies, why humans are actually important to validate the stuff as you're building it. Not just the algorithms, but actually validate the outputs. And we have scholars to do this. So what people are involved? When we start getting into those topics, then I think we start hitting the crux of some of the problems. Right now, today, we have machine learning models out there, and they're used for various different types of industries. But as was said earlier, there's multiple evidences of bias against groups, whether that's an algorithm that discriminates against women in terms of becoming software engineers, and that was a big, big one. Whether a lot of you would realize this, and I know this one very personally, the A-level results and GCSE results a couple years ago. How many people were discriminated against where their grades were downgraded because the algorithm said, well, they come from a certain background, they go to a certain schooling. That doesn't make sense. But that's what the algorithm did. And those that went to those that went to private schools, their grades went up. There's discrimination, there's bias. And the ideas were great, but there was a lack of diversity inside the entire process. There's a case right now with a driving company that I won't mention, but it's discriminated against drivers, and because the facial recognition can't detect the drivers. So those drivers can't drive, and therefore they've been dismissed. And now, because of the software has caused these problems. Now that car company is being taken to court. There are real serious issues with AI. It's not limited to what we see today and what we've seen over the last few months, but actually over the last 10 years. The nice thing is there is a dialogue about this now. A dialogue that has hit our Prime Minister recently, and he had his interview recently, that hit the President recently. So I think the point, what I'm trying to get to in a very long-winded way, is we need representation. There are going to be situations where someone is going to build something, but it does affect this community, and that you all have to have a say in it. Because if you don't, then you're almost condoning that actually it's fine. It's okay. It's okay that someone's building something for a smaller group rather than us.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody have anything to add to that? No? Okay, well, that's very optimistic, I guess. So you've listed these problems, right? You've listed bias. You've also said in the same vein, though, it's not the algorithm that's biased, it's the underlying data. Why shouldn't we just adopt a defeatist attitude and say, well, that it's not a computational problem we're trying to solve, it's a societal problem. So actually, at this level, we can't really do very much because we have to first fix society before we fix the algorithms. Or would you challenge the premise of that question and go, actually, you framed it in a way where it's not appropriate?
Yeah, I think that framing is very deterministic around everything is just going to become algorithmic and AI will just take over. And it's it doesn't particularly need to be that way. We can also put our foot down and say, we think AI is appropriate in these settings, but not in these settings. Or we think, or we put regulation and stuff in place and say, if you have an AI model, it has to be explainable. You have to be able to tell us how it actually got to these answers or these sorts of things. We can decide where AI comes into our lives, and it doesn't really have to be this case of, it's out there and it's inevitable and everything's going to be taken over by it. So it's in my mind, a bit of a false framing around the inevitability of it, whereas we actually do have a lot of say as people. And as people who work in tech especially, we have a lot of say around the things that we build and the things that we accept.
Mm-hmm. Can I build on that? Sorry, just a quick point. And if you remember a few years ago, I'm going to choose my words carefully, if you search for images of a CEO, you would get a white male. That is not the case today. And a lot of those engines have been altered. And this is all about fairness, and we can dive into the definitions of fairness, which probably, I'm sure you'd articulate better than I can. There's many, many definitions. But because people spoke out, and they said that's not a representation of, it might be a representation of the past, but that's not the future we want to build. And so this is where you do have a voice, and you can influence these things. And I think right now with the dialogue that is happening around a lot of the AI topics, this is the perfect time to start talking about it. It's a perfect time to start influencing. I'll add one more thing. You don't need to have a technical background. You don't need to be a data engineer or data scientist. There are many roles that are completely forgotten about, but actually equally as valid in terms of design thinking, human-centered AI. There's a lot of things that are more softer type roles that actually people can get involved with and can influence.
I think one thing that kind of adds on both of the first 2 points that were mentioned earlier is considering stratification of these. And I think there's a really nice paper that I was reading called the taxonomy of risk for large language models specifically. And it was looking at quantifying how you can understand these potential risks. And it has 5 main categories. So kind of the first one we've covered looks at sort of discrimination and hate speech. And then it looks at other instances like information and privacy. Number 3 is all about misuse of this and bad actors. So like a couple of examples are things that we don't necessarily consider. So we think large language modules are useful for like ChatGPT or if you help write some information. But some people use it negatively for scams, for example, and fraud. And that's something that we need to consider. And there are very specific examples of this being used in that case. And also the environment and social background as well. And in the paper, they go into like the breakdown of like giving specific examples and how we can combat this through pre-existing regulation. So I think there are analogs already in society for other forms of technology that have been regulated, and we can use the frameworks to establish a way to make sure that we don't end up in a sort of an apocalyptic scenario. But there are also questions that we don't have the answers to, where we're just kind of learning that these are new kind of emergent areas, and I think that's the part that we don't really know what to do.
Mm-hmm. I have something to add regarding your question about should we fix the society. I don't think we should fix the society because we're different and it's okay to be different and coexist. So what we want to tackle instead is like unconscious biases, like fairness issues and this kind of things. So still like the way that the machine learning models are built is like by data, and the majority of data sometimes is biased. You can't really control it, or like it's geared towards like the majority of the community. So it has like representation for other like sub-communities or substructure of the community, and this is a problematic. So you don't want to have. So I think like, this is also one important thing to have in mind is that we don't want everyone to look the same. The goal is not to be similar or not to look similar and have the same ideas and think similarly and agree on everything. The main idea is to actually represent these different opinions and still coexist together, because I feel like this is a very important, I guess, part of building a machine learning model that can actually have different opinions and represent them and still like be okay, which I don't see this with the way the machine learning models are being built now, but I do believe like this is one of the problems. Some people or some, for example, products will avoid this, but avoid giving opinions about things at all, and just like focus on giving factual answers, which is also a possibility now. But in the future, like I think like you need to also to represent this somehow. So yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about how to do that then, or let's talk about what may be a good way to do that. So, Aleena, you brought up a really good point, which is one way to computationally address this issue is to really stress on explainable AI, right? When we build these and design these systems, we need to have some idea of how it's producing the predictions that it is, and things like uncertainty estimation and things like that. That's a definite question, right? That's a problem that we can actually go back to our desks and think about and research on, right? Yeah, would you like to expand a little bit more about that, or are there other areas where we can actually focus on the how? So if you guys went home today, had a really nice bank holiday weekend, and then back on Tuesday are working on these problems, what's the immediate thing that we're working on in order to solve these problems?
Yeah, I do think explainability is a big thing, and it is like a research field around these things. And a lot of the issue that we have with large language models and things at the moment is this idea of it being black boxed, that you put in a question and it gives you out an answer, but it's not really clear how we got there, and you might put in the same thing and get a different thing in, and so it's really not very predictable at all. And what, like ChatGPT is this very big shiny thing, but all it's really doing is giving you answer-shaped things. It's not really giving you answers. It's giving you things that look like answers that may or may not be correct. And I'm sure, for any of you who do use it a lot, you'll kind of see that sometimes it just makes things up, right? Because it's just giving you things that are shaped like answers. So part of it's the explainability, that we want to be able to, if in a setting where it's a bit more consequential, we might say, okay, why at the hospital did the algorithm say this person should get an operation first? I want to be able to see that. But then I also think the other thing is education. I think we, as a populace, aren't really that clear around, what are these things and what are the limits and how do they control things. People use a lot of social media, but we don't have a strong sense around how much is the algorithm really shaping what we see and what we think about things. So I think it's also about kind of bringing that into the public consciousness a little bit more around, what are the good things that we might get out of AI and these sorts of models, but also what are the dangers, so that there's appropriate pushback just from the public around where things can go wrong.
I have sort of a question for everyone on the panel. How do you think, and whose responsibility is that to bring forward for being aware about the consequences of AI and having that explainability? Is it government? Is it corporations? Where should that come from, and who should lead it?
Everyone. I think part of it will be the government and education system maybe, and part of it will be the companies who are producing products using AI. So maybe before they allow the user to use this product, they should actually make a disclaimer that this is what you're getting out of it, and this is what you should take care of, and this is when you get an answer you should think about before using it, and this is what you should do and what you shouldn't do. But I would say also maybe later on we can also speak about regulations, but I guess this is a different topic.
Yeah, so more remarks on what we can do as research directions to focus on these problems.
Yeah, no, I was listening quietly, and there's a lot of good points. I mean, there's a practical thing of, if you're not within tech right now today, you can get involved in some form of fashion and educate yourself. The second is to your point about educating your communities and making it more practical for all of you. The third, and I talk about this a lot, but I actually see that open source and democratizing the technology and you building stuff inside your own startups or in ventures, but not leveraging some of the big tech stuff, but actually you building stuff and getting teams around you, and still having diverse teams, that's actually going to be very disruptive. And that's also going to democratize the tech. It's going to take away from central control. It's also going to help you with your local communities. And I'm sure a lot of you are involved in your local communities and want to use this. There are stuff out there. There's Facebook's Lambda is available, or Meta's Lambda is available, Alpaca. There's a bunch of models out there. You still need to decide whether it's commercial use or not. But you could still do something practically on Monday morning with a small little team and build something for your local community. This doesn't tie you into what others are doing. Now, to your point, and the challenge that you'll have is when you have a central control, and you have very diverse topics in the world. Depending on which side of the border you might sit, there are very different views. It'll be difficult to build an AI that can cater for all. So this is where democratization will really, really help. Within our own communities, within our own different regions, building our own versions of this. And I'm sure over time, people do that. They did that with Stable Diffusion, with DALL-E, with some of the image ones. The questions I will have, and it comes back to what I started off earlier around the ethics and having our own code of conduct from the Quran and the Sunnah. Are you obtaining the data legally? Like, are you infringing on someone's rights? Like, is really what I'm going to. Whenever you're fine-training this, are you exposing people or underpaying people and exposing them to violent content or sexual content or just things that are going to give them mental health problems? Those are real today issues. I know there's a lot of narratives about future problems, and there's a lot of narrative about how the future is going to be very Terminator-like. But actually, if you bring it today, there have been problems with AI. I don't think as a community we've rallied around them. I think we could do far more, and there are practical things you can do on Monday.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, I mean, so I think explainable AI as a research field, focusing and insisting on that and democratization so that we all...
Transparency as well, right?
Transparency and democratization. I think that's really important, that you guys should be trying the best you can to implement these models and use them for your own use cases, and make those mistakes and then open source those mistakes, right? Write blog posts, share what happened so that everybody else can learn from it, and that's how you move forward as a community. One thing, it's not on the agenda, but it's something that came up when you talked about future problems. Should people or younger people who are in university or doing postgraduate studies, is AI safety as a field? Is that something that you encourage people to go into? So here I'm talking like alignment problems and things like that. Is that something that is worth studying? Or to your point, we've got so many problems to solve until we get there that think about it, but it's not the immediate thing to do.
Is that directed at me?
It's directed at you and then diffuses out to everybody else.
No, okay. So look, and those that know me will know I'll say this. Look, whenever you're studying something, study something you're passionate about. If you're passionate about AI safety, jump into it. If you're passionate about AI research, passionate about building models, if you're passionate about building software, just follow your passions. And that's always the way I've always led my life. So if safety is something important, please do it. I think the world is going to change, and Allahu Alam. Like, no one knows what the future is. I know you've got a bunch of influencers out there talking about what's going to happen tomorrow, and if you don't learn this, then you're going to be irrelevant, and there's lots of things about jobs and this and that. Look, Allahu Alam. But there are things you can learn today and not ignore. And the lessons I would just ask everyone to think about is the last 10 years with social media, where it crept upon us. There was an arms race between different social media companies. And only until certain very senior people, their daughters or their sons, were being mentally affected by this stuff, did they start to pay attention. They never got to regulations, but they started to pay attention. And I'm hoping we have learned a little bit of a lesson, because we're still feeling the ills of the social media boom. We're still feeling the ills of attention deficit disorders, doom scrolling, loss of democracy. There's a lot of things that we should have learned our lessons on. And so for all of you, I would encourage to start looking at this stuff and looking at some of the concerns, having faith in Allah, but also focusing on our ethics, our beliefs, and what is right, and following that.
Yeah, jump in, guys.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think like your studies should not be about what next. So if you're not, for example, if your motive is not being like passionate about a specific topic and you can just perform as usual when if you're following, for example, something that's going to be a future hype. Do it, yes, but I would agree, yes, like it should be something you're passionate about, because usually then you'll be able to give it your best, and most probably you're going to reach conclusions and solutions that no one else had. So it's, I think, like going back to education about machine learning and having more representation, I think like machine learning education, generally speaking, should be accessible to all. Mm-hmm. So one thing, for example, I'm originally from Egypt. So one thing in Egypt, education is accessible to everyone, not like in the UK because it's not as expensive as here. So you can go to university if you want to. You might not be able to get into computer science because unfortunately we don't have a lot of computer science universities and departments there. But you can definitely get university education. But here in the UK, I feel like it's not always easy to get into university education and to get this kind of level of education, and not to say also machine learning. So I do believe like making machine learning education accessible to everyone, having more, like, for example, scholarships. Like when I was working at Quantum Black, they used to have like scholarships for minorities, which I really, really appreciated. So yeah, I think like things like that should happen more, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
I think for me, it's rather than having the high-level sort of graduate understanding of AI, I think a very basic, foundational, something you can do even at primary school level. Because if people are using this technology, I think they should know how it works and the risks and the consequences around it. And as we know, literally hundreds of millions of people use social media already. They use all these systems and they have no idea. And the kind of the safeguarding and the risks around it are very lax. It's just like, currently I think it's like an age guard. You just put your date of birth in and then you can get onto TikTok and everything, and you're exposed to all these things. So I think, how can we best address that, whether it's in family units, whether it's in communities, whether it's in larger societies, whether it's in curriculum at schools from a government kind of a top-down approach. But I think at a very basic level, we should be educating all of us, including children, older adults, even everyone in between, on the core principles of what's involved and the basics of safety. And then we can kind of look at, right, let's go deeper if you want to, if you have the ability and the resources.
Mm-hmm. We've touched on this concept throughout, but we haven't really defined it, which is foundational models, right? We've talked about them in large language models, but we haven't given a formal definition of them. So let's maybe do that now. So when I say foundational models, what does that mean to each of you? And how is this different from the previous generation of deep learning, where we were talking about convolutional neural nets and kind of random forests? What's different about generative AI? It feels different because ChatGPT is everywhere. So what is it? Have we reached a different threshold in AI?
I think it feels different because we're like hearing more about it. But I guess in a way, most of what has happened that's new is more like computational power and things. A lot of models that we use now aren't particularly new. Companies do come up with new things and stuff, but you'll see that the difference between like the ChatGPTs, for example, is largely also about how much data they've been trained on, and that's just more about computation and being able to do that training and being able to get that data. So for me, it's not like a new generation. I would say it's more like just our computational power is expanding over time, and hence things are getting more powerful, but quote unquote powerful.
Can I?
I'll be very quick.
No, go for it.
So I agree. For me, it's also about scale and how it's been pitched. So like I guess the discrete kind of gaps between leaping in the quality of different models. I think it's relatively superficial, but I think it's just been blown up to such a huge scale through fantastic PR and just like dropping it and saying, ChatGPT is going to change your life and like make you rich. But it's really a very small incremental step. And I think kind of the aspects around kind of generative AI particularly are useful in very specific fields, whether it's around text or marketing or writing, at generating very simple but progressive outputs. But I still don't think it's a huge generational step in getting closer to kind of that the utopia of AI.
No. I'd agree with the computational power as like it's there. I mean, it's not for everyone. Not everyone can drop 50 million or 100 million and train a model, right? Very few companies can do this. I agree it's because of lots of data. There's a huge amount of public data and private data that's used. And again, I mentioned back about the ethics on is that data legally obtained? Did you have permission from individuals to use that data? But in terms of foundational, just the concept of it, which is slightly different to the models that we used to build, is that models we used to build were for a purpose. Like whether I'm trying to detect a new molecule in R&D within pharma, right, that's going to solve the next vaccine. Whether I'm trying to detect fraud, or for example, they're purpose-built. Foundational models, because of the volume of data, are more generic and can do a multiple different set of use cases. To your point, that's one. The second is you can then fine-tune on top for a purpose. The way I would think about it, and this is where your heads need to stretch just slightly, and images are the best one, where you've probably seen an image of a panda inside an astronaut suit on the moon holding a flag. That's not real. Right. It's not, but what the model has been able to do is be able to learn so much about what does a panda look like, what does the astronaut look like, what does a picture look like, and try and combine the two together. Now, if you try and extrapolate that a little bit with generative, because we're generating content. Before we were just pushing content, we're generating content. With text, you're generating stuff. Yes, there's a stochastic effect where it's trying to predict what you want, and it will spit out sometimes very nonsense things. But it's generating, and it's when you get your head around this concept, which many people don't. If you think about the image stuff, if you can get your head around the image stuff, okay, this stuff didn't exist before, someone's done something, and it's not Photoshop, it's more than that, then this is what the foundational models give us, which is why it's a little bit of a game changer in one respect. And I agree that there's some use cases, but people are trying to figure out how can I use this on top of what I've already built before. You're the machine learning expert, though, right? So.
I'm just going to add to this only one thing. So I guess also one very important thing about the new foundational models is being able to alter its output. So basically, there is a reinforcement learning, which is just learning from seeing a new input that you didn't see before. Like, so the machine learning model has been built and learned like different kind of data, and then when you try to make a specific prediction, ask a question, for example, for this machine learning model, so it will answer based on what it has seen before. It will not give you any kind of new ways of interpreting things. But now, like with this foundational model, you can use reinforcement learning to give it a specific, what they call like prompts, and then you tell it, actually, I want to have this output in this specific format. So you can tell it, oh, like I want you to speak about this conflict, like I don't know, like a mean girl, for example. Then it will act like a mean girl describing this. So you can basically just instruct it to do what you want. And I think like this is very powerful, but also very scary, because at the end of the day, you might end up in this kind of bubble. It treats you like basically get used to a specific only point of view, and this will be all the outcomes that you're going to get out of it if you're asking it on a specific sort of line. So I do believe like the being able to feedback, like even like input to the machine learning model to alter its output, and then having the ability also for this machine learning model to keep the history of the previous conversations as well, what was going on before, and not to start from zero, I guess is also very like it's one of the differences between the old models and the new models.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the scale, generality, and not being able to start from zero, right? And learning from previous generation of models. Does that raise any unique ethical concerns? So I'm sure people have been kind of looking at these amazing evocative examples of code generation, and they'll think, okay, is my time as a software developer up because ChatGPT can do this, right? Does this new class of model give us new ethical considerations that we have to worry about? And is it going to take over our jobs? So, yeah.
I don't believe AI is going to take over our jobs. And especially, I'm a software engineer, and I fundamentally do not believe it's going to take over my job. And any engineers who've used GitHub Copilot knows that it has varying levels of success, but you're mainly just proofreading a lot of the time. I think it'll take over stuff in a very contained environment. So we might have models that are trained on very specific things and be able to do that. But I don't think I think there's a lot of marketing around how powerful a lot of these things are, and there are limits, and they don't fail in very predictable ways either. Most of our existing computational systems have like failure modes and have errors and will say like, I can't do this, but using AI stuff, it doesn't tell you like I can't do this. It'll just give you something, and you don't really know when that's happening. And so I think we'll find in practice that a lot of environments that's not really going to be acceptable, but we'll be happy to use it in a way where we think it's quite predictable, or where maybe it's just less consequential. But no, I don't think my job's going to be taken over by it. Maybe that's just optimism.
Yeah. Yes. Any sort of novel ethical considerations that have come from this new class of technology? Or is it just same thing but more proliferated?
So in terms of your question, in terms of taking over jobs, look, I think a lot of tasks will become easier as you've gone on. Like my background has been as a software engineer. I have used a lot of these technologies. Before we had IDEs, we had just simple notepads, and we used to type things in manually. Now we've got IDEs which are powerful, allow us to debug stuff. Copilot, to your point, actually suggests stuff. Is it great? You know, if you're a proper software engineer, you've been doing it for years. No, some of the stuff that comes out is like, why did you suggest that? Where did you get that from? And it's a bit frustrating as well. But some tasks, it does really well. So synthesis of documents. And going back to what I said about, social media age has really messed up our brains of reading, 10, 12-page documents. Can we synthesize it into 5 bullet points? Well, actually, it's really good at doing that. It's really good at, you spit it into a document and you get something back out. And that's really good if you're about to prepare for a meeting or even a presentation. So there's lots of things I think it's going to really help. Right? And time will tell as we try as a society to figure out how we can apply it. There are lots of companies who are trying to do things, but here comes the kind of maybe the ethical stuff on privacy and sharing your information with someone else or something else that maybe then it's in some kind of system, and then they're going to use that to retrain the system. And is that information really, should you be sharing about yourself? I know a lot of companies actually have a worry about this, about sharing data outside of their own boundaries. And so, again, I come back to my point that I think open source is really going to really open the way and pave the way for the technology. There are other ethical concerns I have in terms of the data that was used for some of these large language models, around the IP and the copyright. And there are lots of things at the moment being debated and also in the courts. So time will tell.
Yes, I do believe there are new sort of ethical considerations, and part of it relates to the way that the current large language models are built. Because now you need to have a lot of computational power, you need to have lots of data to be able to build this. Actually, its operational cost as well can be beyond what small companies can afford. And then you have this sort of question, this kind of technologies will be limited to only some major players, and then the foundational models that are being published and used in all the top layer applications are going to be just few of them, right? So this means that there are only few people who are going to control the kind of information that is spread over the communities to different people and so on and so forth. And then the question comes what kind of ideas they will actually reinforce or basically distribute or have in this kind of models that's going to move to the communities. And this is a big question: is that who's going to control this, and what are the regulations around it, and how can we control actually not to have these models built reinforcing biases, or even giving misinformation. There's a huge risk of misinformation just because the output of these models sounds very logical sometimes, but it's so untrue. So, for example, historical information it's not true at all. It's making up some events that did not happen, or say about scientific facts it's not true at all. So I would say reinforcing misinformation and also controlling the narrative of the information that's going to be spread to the different communities.
Can I just respond just on one point on and this is about the open source. There are models out there who are, okay, it's not as good as ChatGPT, but they're not bad, like Alpaca or Lambda. And you can train them on your own laptop, cost you about $300, maybe you get a graphics card. So some of that has already been leaked and democratized a little bit, and there's some incredible innovation. Someone got it running on an iPhone, and it's probably not the best performance, but the fact is we're heading in that direction. So I do believe that open source is going to run ahead as long as the community is willing to do it and researchers are willing to look into this stuff. The challenge with some of the large organizations is that they're very closed, and it's almost like they're doing their tit for tat. But I think the open source community are really being collaborative, really trying to push things forward.
Mm-hmm. Yep, so that brings us to a close of the panel. So I think one last remark from what you said is, yeah, democratization will help, and that means all of you should play around with this and break stuff and try to implement this. That's how this field moves forward, not us sitting here and talking about it, you going back to your laptops and trying to build stuff with it. That's how you break that monopoly. Please give me a round, don't give me a round of applause, but you can if you want, you can. So please join me in giving a round of applause to the panelists.
Thank you so much for the AI and ethics panel. Can we make some noise for them again? And for Aleena for stepping forward so last minute to jump in the gap that we had as well. Can we give her a round of applause?